Thank you, everyone here and in the future who are watching this wonderful presentation on trusting your enthusiasm. And we're going to take a special look in a little bit at what we mean by enthusiasm. But I want to talk, sort of lay some groundwork. This is Sapphyre. She's over there on my screen. I've known Sapphyre for a few years, maybe 5 years. And really, it was just like this thing on LinkedIn that you were an acupuncturist and a 5-element acupuncturist, which is very meaningful to me. And then suddenly you were in grad school. And I was like, she does not come from a wealthy family. Let me just say that. She did not, like, this is not some, oh, I think I'll just go to grad school now. I knew enough about you to know that this must be a big thing. This must have been a big leap of faith. And so I want to kind of spool back and just summarize. We're shooting for 30 minutes. It could go longer if everybody has time. How did you come to become an acupuncturist? And then we'll talk about that leap into grad school. I want to probe that with you.
All right. Well, first, two things I want to just make sure are clear. While I have had some 5-element training, I actually have been trained in TCM. My program, I specifically chose the program that I'm attending because it's rooted in Taoist practices. The school I went to is the Academy of Chinese Culture and Health Sciences in Oakland, California. And they are the second oldest school in the United States. And its Sifu founder was like diehard Taoist practitioner. So, and so they only teach Chinese medicine at the school. You know, other schools, you'll get other Asian modalities worked in. And that was not the case at my school. So, but I have done some studying with Lonnie Jarrett. So I do have some of the 5-element in there as well. And then the other thing is, I do not come from money. I come from a very working class family. However, once I was an adult, my mother did end up kind of going up the ladder a bit. So that's just to say that I think sometimes when people see my parents and see where they live, they assume that that was just how it always was for us. And that's not really truly the case. So anyway, just wanted to put that out there. As far as my journey to deciding to go back to grad school. So
first tell us what led you to become an acupuncturist. Like,
yeah,
that wasn't anything that I ever thought you were interested in when I first met you, when I first knew you over here in Virginia, and you're in California now.
Yes, very true. Oh gosh, how did acupuncturist? Well, I don't consider myself just an acupuncturist, I should say. In the United States, it's very common for acupuncture and herbal medicine to be spliced out, and you have a choice between learning one or the other. But like in my school and the program, you learn both at the same time. And to me, that is a Chinese medicine practitioner. You really, in my opinion, you don't really sever those two things. And I came to Chinese medicine in a very unusual way. I was living on the commune, as you know.
Which commune? Tell everyone the name and explain a little bit.
Sure. I was living at, that's where the story starts. I was living at Twin Oaks Community. I began my process as a single mom with 2 young children to become a member basically in December of 2010. And completed that long process by the end of April of 2011 and moved there as a member at the end of May of 2011. And at the time that I moved there, my children were 6.5 and 10.5. And I was about a little over a year out of a divorce. And throughout my time at Twin Oaks, I look back at my time at Twin Oaks and I see it as a time that really allowed me the resource security to be able to get out of survival mode and to really move into a more healing mode. I agreed to work 42 hours a week in the labor system in exchange for food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, and a small monthly stipend.
And 42 hours a week includes caring for your children, as I remember, right?
Yes.
It's a very different 42 hours than what we think of out here as the 40-hour work week.
That's a crucial point, because there's a lot of labor in our world out here that goes unpaid. Washing the dishes, doing laundry, grocery shopping, taking care of the children. And all of these things are labor creditable in the Twin Oaks labor system. So a lot of people hear 42 hours, that's a lot. You get like if I am doing dishes after the dinner shift in ZK, that counted,
Beautiful.
So in that time there, I began to work a lot on healing my chronic PTSD that I had from childhood trauma. And I was working specifically at the time with psilocybin mushrooms. And that looked often like me on a weekend. I didn't have my children. They were off visiting their father. I'd go out to the woods by myself and work. And at the tail end of my time at Twin Oaks, like fall of 2015, I had one journey in particular where I heard this voice very loudly at the end of the journey that my next leveling up was to sit in an woman-led ayahuasca circle. And I remember feeling totally incredulous, like, me, ayahuasca, like I'm from North America, I'm living in Virginia, I don't know anybody from South America, I'm not going to go traipsing down to South America, I don't know how I'm going to make that happen, but I heard it, and I heard it loud and clear, and it just kind of got stored away back there. And then the following summer, not quite a full year later, I was just given this opportunity to go to the New England Women's Herbal Conference up in New Hampshire in that August. And when I was there, I got into this wonderful, heartfelt mind meld with another woman by the fire circle that night. And I spoke that out loud, and I said that to her. And then the next day, I met Rocio Alarcon, who is an Ecuadorian ethnobotanist. And she was talking about ayahuasca, the master plant. And so I began to follow Rocio, and a few months later found out she was going to be teaching an intro to shamanic herbalism course in Ecuador. And I decided I was going to sign up for it. I felt that the tug of the golden thread. And when I signed up for it, I found out that we would be spending some nights in the jungle, and there would be a night with ayahuasca. And so fast forward about 6 months later, I went to Ecuador, and we ended up in the Yasuni at her center, which is called the Iamoy Center. And I want to be very clear that the majority of the trip, it was really focused on communication with all plants, really tapping into communicating with nature, recognizing we are nature, we aren't separate from nature, and just remembering how to hear the other beings speak to us. So it wasn't about Like, it wasn't about just going to sit with this one master plant. That was just a night of it. And in that first contact with that plant, and it was predominantly all women, predominantly women-led. Wasn't
cool.
quite precisely, but that was the thread that got me there. And I now look back at that night and realize it was just more of an initiation rather than like a one-time experience. But I had this very clear vision that night with the vine where I was in a crowded market and this little Asian grandmother that I understood to be an ancestral grandmother of mine, but not a grandmother of mine in real life. She came up and she poked her finger into my chest and she said, "You have wasted too much time. You need to quit wasting time. You need to study Chinese medicine and get on it." And when I came up out of that vision, I felt just as in a state of disbelief as I had, a year and a half earlier when I first heard the message I was supposed to sit with this plant, right? I'm like, Chinese medicine. I don't know anything about China or Chinese medicine. That's not for me. But then I was talking with another friend of mine there on that trip, and she said, "Well, you better listen." And I was like, I don't know, Jen. She said, "That was a very clear message from your guides, and you better listen." So this is February of 2017. I kind of tucked it away in the back. I didn't really tell anybody. And at this point, I've left Twin Oaks with my partner, and we have been working on our own communal project now for about a year and a half. And I won't get into all the ways and which ways that led us. But at this point, we were back in Louisa and kind of halfway between Acorn and Twin Oaks and, working on vegetable seed production. And I was working on medicinal herb production and very content with where my life was. And so I just kind of tossed it to the side. We'll see what happens. And about 6 months later, the Unite the Right rally happened in Charlottesville. And I was there with a group of folks. We really felt that we were just going to be going in and, doing some civil disobedience of blocking the park entrances. And that would be pretty much the extent of it. None of us knew what we were getting into that morning. We understood the threat intellectually, but for me personally, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but for me personally, I didn't really have an embodied sense of what was really to come that day, and I walked around that day trying to engage some of the right-wing folks that were there and trying to ask them, like, why do you feel so strongly about this? Or why do you hate other people? Why are you carrying this hate in your heart? And of course, nobody wanted to talk. That wasn't what they were there for that day, But I walked away from that whole event just really questioning my experiences in the context of activism, because activism has often led me, onto the streets and chanting and trying to bring attention. And then I'm not saying that those things don't have a place, but for me personally, after that experience, I realized this is not where I am supposed to be of service. If I want to really create change in the world, I have to start with myself and changing the way I hold things in my heart, but I have to also help other people. And the thing I saw the most that day in a lot of these men's eyes, I just saw a lot of wounded little boys, a lot of wounded children. And I thought, I have to find a way to hold some compassion for those wounds. And I also would like to be able to hold space to help transform that suffering, transmute that suffering into healing and into love and into remembering that we are all one. There is no division, that this is just illusion, you know? So then that vision from Ecuador kind of came back forward, and I was still batting it away. Like, I don't know if is that the way? I don't know. And then a few weeks later, I was returning to the New England Women's Herbal Conference with my friend from Ecuador that I had made. And when I went, I met her partner for the first time, and he does tarot readings. And it was the first time he and I were meeting. And he did my cards. And he said, oh, I see you got some big changes coming. He said, you know, you like the commune, but you're kind of done. Like, this isn't where you're supposed to be. And I see you going back to school and doing something that gives you the license to touch. Wow. So that you can do the work you came here to do in this lifetime. And he's like, I see it. He's like, I think it's something like acupuncture, Chinese. And at that point, I was just like, did Jen say something to you?
Right, right.
He was like, what are you talking about? He had no idea. They hadn't talked, you know? And so after hearing that and sitting with it for a couple of days, I picked up the phone and I called my mom. And I said to my mom, I'm thinking about maybe going back to school. And my mom's response was, well, what can I do to help you?
Oh, nice.
So pretty much once I really accepted, okay, I'm getting a very clear message here and I'm going to follow it, even though my thinking mind really doesn't understand and it doesn't make sense, everything fell into place within months. And I moved. So that was August of 2017. And I moved out here to California in May of 2018 and began my program.
Wow. And when did you end up and start practicing?
I graduated in April of 22, so just a few months ago, right?
Oh, okay.
And well, I guess that's 8 months ago now.
April of 22. Yeah, you're right. That is a while ago. It seems like yesterday, but
I know.
So you just started practicing in April.
Well, yeah. So in between graduation and practicing is the licensing exams. And California has its own licensing exam. In California, Chinese medicine practitioners are considered primary care providers. Okay. So not only did we get the Chinese medicine, but we had the first 2 years of Western medical school, because we have to be able to assess a patient's health and be able to notice red flags, you know, that high blood pressure that might lead to a stroke, these types of things. So, their board exam is very much a safety exam and very much geared towards, can you identify those red flags? And can you keep your patient safe from, you know, say a punctured lung? And so that was my first hurdle towards licensure and practicing. And then because I am unclear that I want to remain in California, I also sat for the national board exams. Wow. And there were 4. So I did 5 in total in about 2 weeks from June to July.
Oh my gosh. Of 2021.
Of 2022. So that was from year. Right. So April 2022, I graduated.
You graduated. Okay.
Classwork.
Okay. Wow.
June 14th was when I took the California licensing exam. And then over the course of the following 2 weeks, I took the other 4 exams and wrapped up right at the beginning of July. But it took until the end of July for me to actually receive my state license because of a protest-related arrest I had on my record. Right. So I had to jump through a lot of bureaucratic hoops of providing the arresting records and the court documents, and it was
probably their first time, actually, when I think about it, licensing someone who had a protest-related arrest.
Maybe. I mean, it is California. I'm sure.
That's true. You're right. Actually, that's true. That's pretty cool.
But it was stressful because the woman I was working for at the time, she was expecting me to begin treating patients on July 15th. I didn't get my license until July 23rd. So it was just this, like, you know.
Sorry. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And now you're in practice for yourself. And while going into practice for yourself by, on your own, you decide to go to get your doctorate. That
Yeah.
was that was the thing on LinkedIn when I was like, what? Oh my God. How is she doing this?
Well, part of why I decided to do it was because I've already wrecked my spleen for 4 years.
You're what?
Already in study mode, study mode, study mode.
Oh, your spleen jing, is that what you said? The
Spleen
spleen
chi,
energy?
yeah.
Oh, spleen
And
chi. Okay.
I there's a couple of different reasons. One, my foundations professor, Phil Settles, he's now the dean of the doctorate program at my school. And, we're going through doing the foundations that you have to know to pass the board exam, but he did an amazing job of always tying it back to the classics and tying it back to the Shanghanlun, or, giving us these wonderful little nuggets of other diagnostic systems than what we were getting from the TCM.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things
and TCM stands for traditional Chinese medicine, is that right?
Yeah,
so a kind of a different strand than the 5-element.
So this is something that a lot of folks don't understand. We're talking about a medicine that really has its roots back almost 5,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so there isn't necessarily there wasn't a standardized form. And this was teacher transmission. You had a master. If you wanted to learn the medicine, you went to the practitioner you wanted to learn from. He typically had a textbook, and you began by copying his textbook by hand. That was how you proved you wanted to study. And then, if you're lucky, maybe he would allow you to clean the rooms. You got to there was a period of years where you're just following and observing, and then get to maybe finally do some hands-on stuff, right? That was how the knowledge was transmitted. It was always passed down. And so there's a lot of different lineages out there.
Okay.
But most of it, rooted in the classics such as the Huangdi Neijing or the Huangdi Nanjing. There's the Ling Shu. There's all these ancient texts that are more like Han Dynasty, maybe like 2,000 years ago, that kind of brought some unifying pieces into the medicine. And folks practice this medicine, like I said, as in a transmitted fashion up until Mao took over China. And initially in the Cultural Revolution, China, they wanted to actually do away with Chinese medicine. They saw it as superstitious and not really, kind of a tool of the ruling class type thing. However, I think it was in the late 50s, Mao began to realize that they were way too dependent on Russia and outside sources for their medicine. And he realized he had an opportunity to really cultivate cultural pride by allowing the Chinese medicine to continue, but he decided he wanted to standardize it and take out all the superstition. So there was this whole process of the development of traditional Chinese medicine under Mao in the Cultural Revolution of the late 50s, early 60s. 5-element practice that we know in the United States originates from a man named J.R. Worsley. He's British. And, 5-element practice has its roots in classical Chinese medicine for sure. And there are tools within the 5-element system that are very elegant and work really well. But I would assert that 5-element is but one tool.
Okay.
Right? And one thing that if I was going to offer one critique with the 5-element is that they have this notion that it's like, well, we bring the spirit back into the medicine and it's the spiritual aspect. I would argue that the Chinese never separate the body and the spirit and the mind the way that we do in the West. So even if you're using a materialistic form or lineage of the medicine, such as TCM, what you do to alter the body's landscape at that specific point is going to have an impact on the psycho-spiritual subtle body, if you will, just as much as it will on the physical material realm.
I want to bring us back, although I think there's something, well, so I didn't want to give away that some of your transformation, some of your leaps were connected with entheogens.
Oh.
I didn't want to give that away. I didn't want to turn people off, and I didn't want to turn people on about that. I didn't, because to me, it's held in a much bigger context. Americans are dumb. We think drugs. And it's like, we either think they're great or they're terrible. And it's like, no, none of that. There's a context here. And so enthusiasm refers to the God within, and entheogens, like psilocybin and ayahuasca, also refer to the God within. Generating the God within is entheogen, and enthusiasm is feeling this being possessed by the God within. And the reason I've called it trusting that is that many people I work with, many people who are attracted to work with me, want to trust their enthusiasm, but they don't know when to. And so you're talking about psycho-spiritual and body, I think brings us back pretty neatly to, okay, here you are in this doctoral program with this man who's been your foundations teacher. And you decide, partly because of him, and I'm seeing that mirrored in the ancient tradition. You didn't go copy his textbook and scrub his floors, but you apprenticed to someone you really respected. And I think there's a number of things that I am getting that helped you trust your enthusiasm, but it was still a pretty big leap, was it not? I mean, okay, you were in work mode. You had already, you said, wrecked your spleen chi by studying for 4 years. It's like, okay, what's another 2 more years?
Yeah.
While you're still an entrepreneur, while you're in practice for yourself.
Well, I have had the benefit of because I'm in the Bay Area, there's a lot of practitioners here, and some of my teachers in the master's program were from the doctorate program. One in particular, Anya Bodine, and one of the things that I kind of heard is like, when you have your own flourishing practice, like you're an established practitioner, and you go into the doctorate program, that's a lot to have on the plate. You're working 3-4 days, and you're going to go to school for 4 days straight, one long weekend a month, and maybe you're working in some clinic shifts on top of that for school. That's a lot. I think that there's benefit in going to the program as an established practitioner, just because you have a little bit better idea of what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are as a more established practitioner. So I could see it being a little bit more helpful in that way. But for me, on the flip side, I'm not a super established practitioner. I'm less than a year out. So I don't have a huge patient base yet. I have a lot of flexibility in my schedule. And I don't feel the pressure of like, oh, I already have such a full workload, and now I'm adding this on top of it. It's more like I have the luxury of kind of tempering my workload with patients in conjunction, like or in reference to what is my workload for this semester in school? What can I realistically take on right now?
Wow.
So
did you have fear? Did you have to deal with any fear going into the doctoral program, or was it just like, okay, I'm really clear, I'm going to do this?
I've been really clear. And this is, I kind of went off on the tangent about the different styles. That's fine. Point with that was that, one of the things that Phil shared with us was about the Shenhammer pulse lineage. And I knew that fall of 2018, I wanted to learn this pulse lineage. And I've heard from so many different folks how amazing the herbal program, the Jingfeng herbal program is for the doctorate. I've heard from so many different folks and actually seen the results in the master's clinic of the orthopedic training that Anthony Vondermill provides. So hearing all that, I knew that it was only going to be a benefit to add those tools in my tool belt as well, right? And there is a certain level of drudgery behind the masters. Yes, there's all these wonderful ancient texts that inform these modern day texts. Yes, you know, all of this wonderful Taoist philosophy behind these texts that, you know, we're pulling and extracting information out of. But there wasn't any space to explore any of that because I just had to cram all this information into my brain to pass the board exams. That was all that mattered, right? It was to jump through the flaming loops of board exams. So the doctorate to me feels like finally getting to eat the cake. I'm getting to study, you know, this pulse lineage system that I've always wanted to learn. And it is a direct teacher transmission type lineage. I am going to be studying the classical herb formulas written in the Shanghai and finally maybe beginning to grok the understanding of this complex formulation. And there is this flexibility in the clinical aspect of the degree where you can do all these professional development credits. You know, a certain amount have to be in certain areas, but I essentially can take those and gear it towards the classics. So there's a woman named Sabina Wilms in Washington. She's an amazing sinologist who translates a lot of the ancient medical texts, and she's very focused on Sun Si Miao, who was an amazing ancient practitioner. And she teaches a course on how to read the classical Chinese characters. I can take that course and apply it towards my doctorate, you know. And so there's just a way that there's a lot of flexibility. And so I can just finally dive into all these pieces of this ancient medicine that I wasn't able to indulge in really during the master's program.
And, you know, I see you really geeking out, and I'm like right there with you. Like that's the doctoral program is what I'm fascinated by many of the things you're talking about. I've just glanced at them over the years. You know, I've read the text by the Yellow Emperor. Is that the Ling Shu? I can't remember. Yeah. You know, I've read it, an English translation that's available on Wikipedia. So I'm a geek, an amateur geek, and you're sort of a professional. And you seem completely unabashed. You seem unashamed. I often find that there's kind of an anti-intellectual streak in our culture. And there's a million ways to be an intellectual. There's a million rabbit holes to dive down. You don't seem at all embarrassed to be diving down this rabbit hole.
Not at all, because I find that the more I can go back to the, you know, it's like going into the classics and being able to mull it over, kind of like the Tao Te Ching. You read it once, doesn't really fully sink in, right? Like you get some pieces, but then you can go back and read the same passage and you see a whole nother facet of meaning that comes in. And so for me, as I'm seeing patients, I'm getting this real time informed understanding of what they're trying to tell us in these classics. Or it's like I'm seeing a pattern in my patients that I don't really fully understand, but I can go back and now all of a sudden this passage I've read 15 times and it made no sense, it finally clicks. You know, so it's to me, it's not even about just satisfying my own intellectual curiosity. It's about ensuring that I am doing my best to understand this medicine in as deep of a way as possible to be able to be of service in the best way as possible for the patients that come through my door.
And I would describe that as that was your enthusiasm from the beginning. And you followed, like you said, the golden thread. And it really feels like, okay, you didn't have to know everything up front.
Right.
You had to trust like mad, like you
Right.
described, and take a lot of leaps and maybe throw something back and kind of almost hide it from yourself for a while and then grow into it.
Yeah.
But you were led, and one thing led to the next thing, and you kept following it. There's just, I think we have this illusion that it all just unfolds right away. If we've got the right path, it's all easy. I mean, obstacles were removed, like you said. Like once you committed, many things unfolded and were removed. But
right. It was like
there was a journey.
There's like so many obstacles that were just removed out of the way, and it was like water flowing and just, I was going with the flow of the water right to my destination. And then not quite a full 2 years after I got here, COVID hit and the shutdown hit. Oh, yeah. My last 2 years of my training was online. Not my clinical training. I was able to return back to the clinical, but there were courses that absolutely should have been taught to us hands-on that weren't. And that was the other factor in me deciding to move forward with the doctorate degree. I wanted a little bit more of guidance, a little bit more of a kind of like a residency. Even though we're considered primary care providers in the state of California, we're not given a residency. You graduate, you pass the boards, there you go, right? That doesn't work that way with medicine, and there's a reason why they call it practicing medicine.
That's well put.
So before our meeting, I had my clinic shift, and I was able to present my patient's case for me, this patient in particular has, really severe chronic pain on the left arm, always feels better after the treatment. But if we're lucky, that lasts a week, and then we're kind of right back. And so for this patient in particular, she's grateful that she gets that relief for that time period. She's happy to keep coming back. But for me, I'm like, oh, this isn't good. I'm only treating the symptoms. I'm not getting down to the root. And so I was able to present that case to this very experienced practitioner and find out that I was actually doing all the things that I should be doing. And then there's a couple of things I could add in. And I was also given some very concrete, objective tools to be able to measure the progress that I was lacking. So that's why I'm in the doctorate, right?
Yeah.
I get that kind of residency in a sense.
Totally. So, Sapphyre, I know we're over time. I'm feeling like it's okay to wrap up, that I could interview you for probably at least another hour, and that probably doesn't make sense. But are there things that you wish I had asked you that you think are important in this journey?
Well, I guess, yeah, the thing that I would really like to drive home is, you kind of touched on it a little bit, that people hear the words around these substances and think, oh, drugs, bad,
or good,
the fact
recreational.
Right. The fact of the matter is that there is a lot of research in the last decade or so that shows how beneficial these substances are in terms of treating anxiety, depression, PTSD, these types of psycho-emotional disturbances that, frankly, a lot of us are dealing with, especially these days in a post-COVID world. And so, I think it's really important to note that set and setting matters. And
I love, of course, matters. That's Terence McKenna's phrase. Right. Yeah, right. Very important.
And treating them like the sacred medicines they are matters.
Yeah.
And
when he said set and setting, he meant mindset and physical setting, as I understand it. Those are the two things, right? There's a sacredness of a container. Your mind has to be aligned. You have an intention. Yeah, it's not a spree. It's not like what we think about.
It's not, you're at a concert and all of a sudden you decide, like, I'm just going to pop these into my mouth and you
That
know.
would be a bad idea. Yeah. Right.
I
Right.
mean, people do it, but I'm just saying that that's not the way
Yeah.
that I approach these substances. So
Right.
that's
Nor I. In my experience, I agree that for me, that would be devastating to do them in that kind of a context. It
yeah.
needs to be a very carefully structured context.
Yeah. And I mean,
Sorry.
I would even go so far as to say having somebody who can sit with you is a really helpful, a sober somebody who can sit with you is really helpful to have around too. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, it was incredibly difficult to surrender control, to surrender an intellectual understanding of what it was I was doing, and just trusting that I had received a really clear message from spirit and that this was what I was being asked to do. And there are times even now after 4 years, and like it was a big deal. I had to give up my entire life that I had spent the previous decade building to move across the country 3,000 miles away and come here. But it was where that thread tugged me to. And it hasn't been always an easy journey. And there's been plenty, especially with the COVID stuff. It would have been very easy to throw up my hands and move back east. But I didn't. I stuck it out. And I am still very much in a place of surrender and trusting and knowing that at some point, maybe the why will become a little bit more clear. And maybe not, and that's okay. I just, I at the end of the day, after treating patients, I do feel that I am on the right path. I do feel like I found my calling. And I am doing my best on a daily basis to embody that medicine.
It feels to me like what you surrendered to is what you're giving. It's interesting to me. It's a very similar kind of energy that you wanted to put yourself in that stream so that you could be a stream bearer at the same time.
Yeah, that reminds me. I was recently told by a woman who's like a medium. She uses this sigil that kind of looks like a goblet, like a cup, so there's the line like this, and then the line down, and lines up above going into the cup. And she's like, in order to give from the bottom of the cup, your cup has to be open and the flow coming in. Right.
Yeah.
So it is. That's
very interesting. That's what I feel. That's kind of what I'm seeing, is that you've put yourself in that stream. Well, so inspiring. You are inspiring. Your journey is inspiring. May it go out into the world and reach everyone it needs to. Thank you so much.